I had always believed that rock bottom would come with sirens or screaming, maybe even a dramatic thunderstorm. But for me, it came in silence. Just a cold November wind slicing through broken window frames in a house I hadn't stepped foot in since I was 17. The place was exactly as I remembered, only worse. Faded wallpaper hung like wet paper towels, peeling at the corners. The old wooden floors groaned beneath my weight, every step a reminder of how abandoned everything had become, including me. I set my overstuffed duffel bag on a rusted metal chair that nearly gave way and walked over to the dented tin stove in the corner. A few logs had been stacked beside it, probably the last thing my grandfather touched before he passed away 4 years ago. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, crouching down to light a match with trembling fingers. The flame caught a crumpled newspaper and slowly reached the kindling. I exhaled as warmth, faint but real, started to spread. That night, I talked to the dead more than the living. Because, honestly, I had no one else. Just 2 weeks ago, I was engaged to the man of my dreams. Victor Langston. CO. Charismatic. Powerful. The kind of man who could silence a room just by walking into it. The kind of man who had made me believe I was special. And now here I was pregnant, unemployed, and homeless, curled up beside a fire in my dead grandfather's decaying house in the middle of Flint Hills, Kansas. Some fairy tale. My hands were still shaking when I pulled the sleeves of my coat over my fingers and sat cross-legged near the stove. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall at first. I stared into the small dancing flames until they blurred, until the sobs came anyway, racking my chest and clawing at my throat. I didn't cry quietly. I cried like something had been ripped out of me, because something had. I cried until I had nothing left, until the fire crackled loud against the silence. Then I sat there, empty, waiting for the numbness to take over. It was so cold that even inside I could see my breath. The lights didn't work. I checked every switch. I tried the breaker box. Nothing. So I lit a candle I found in a drawer, pulled out a half-eaten sandwich from my bag, bought with the last $10 I had, and chewed without tasting. My stomach wasn't hungry, but I ate because I needed to survive. The shadows crept longer against the walls, and I couldn't shake the memory of just days ago, sitting in a fine dining restaurant in Topeka, sipping champagne while flipping through wedding catalogs with Victor, laughing, blushing when he kissed my hand across the table. I slept in my old childhood bedroom that night, fully clothed, curled up on top of a dust-covered mattress, too exhausted to change the sheets. Every creak of the wind outside felt like something closing in. I stared at the cracked ceiling until my eyes finally shut, but sleep didn't bring peace. Only memories, loud, vivid, painfully clear. The first time Victor called me his girl. The moment he slid a diamond ring onto my finger in front of the company's Christmas tree. The day I told him I was pregnant, and for a brief moment saw real joy flash across his face. All of it felt fake now. I used to think people only lost everything after making huge mistakes, but I hadn't made any. I was loyal, quiet, obedient, maybe too obedient. I'd built my entire life around his. I'd let him shape me into someone he could show off. And when he didn't want me anymore, he erased me like a typo on a screen. My name is Olivia Reed, and this is the story of how I lost everything. But it's also the story of how I found something far more important. Myself. I met Victor Langston on a Tuesday morning, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and new beginnings. I'd answered a job posting for an executive assistant position at a high-rise construction firm in downtown Topeka. I wore my one and only blazer, a thrift store gray thing with sleeves a little too long, and clutched my resume like a lifeline. I knew I wasn't qualified. No prior experience. No connections. Just a degree in art history, a student loan statement longer than a CVS receipt, and a desperate need for stability. There were 3 other women in the waiting room, all older, better dressed, and talking about their experience with scheduling software and project budgets. I wanted to run, but I stayed because I didn't have anywhere else to go. When Victor walked in, everything stopped. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. Perfectly tailored suit, controlled confidence, not a hair out of place. He looked right past the other candidates and stopped at me. "You must be Olivia," he said. His voice was calm, smooth, as if we'd met before. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The interview was short. I fumbled through most of it, stammering over questions I hadn't prepared for. But Victor didn't seem to mind. He smiled in a way that made you feel like the sun was rising just for you. And by the next morning, I got the call. "You start tomorrow." I thought I'd imagined it. But no, I was hired. No trial period, no second interview. Just like that, I was Victor Langston's personal assistant. He started small, compliments on my neat handwriting, casual chats in the hallway, a warm coffee left on my desk before I arrived. Within weeks, he was giving me rides home, telling me I had an old soul, that I was refreshing compared to the usual types. I soaked it up like sunlight on a starving flower. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I mattered. I fell hard, not all at once, but in quiet moments after a long meeting when he'd touch my shoulder and say good job with real warmth in his eyes, or the day he fixed the strap on my purse and said, "You really should let someone take care of you." One night, after the company holiday party, he offered to drive me home. The air was cold, and the streets were glowing from holiday lights. He played soft jazz in the car and asked if I wanted to stop by his place for a drink. I said yes. I don't even remember what we talked about. I just remember the way he looked at me right before he kissed me, like I was something fragile and beautiful he didn't want to break. We slept together that night, and the morning after, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "I knew from the moment I saw you, you weren't like the others." From that moment on, I belonged to him. He moved me into a small but fully furnished apartment close to his own. Bought me clothes I never could have afforded. Lingerie that still had tags on them. Gold earrings. Spa gift cards. A whole new life wrapped in ribbon. I told myself this was love. That maybe, just maybe, I was finally getting my turn. Victor didn't like my old apartment, the one-bedroom shoebox with water stains and noisy neighbors. "You're not living like that anymore," he said. "I'll set you up with something decent. You deserve it." He meant it, or at least he convinced me he did. Sometimes we'd go out together to fundraisers, gallery openings, even one weekend getaway to the Gulf. He made sure I dressed the part. "My girl should turn heads," he'd whisper as he zipped up a new dress on me. I laughed then, flattered. I didn't see the control under the charm. He never let me drive when we were together. He always held the check. I never met any of his friends. Just his business associates, the polished kind who spoke in vague compliments and subtle judgment. But I didn't care, because every time he looked at me, I felt chosen. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I thought it would be the end of everything. But instead, Victor smiled. "Well," he said, "my parents have been nagging about grandchildren. Guess you made that decision easy." I was stunned. He wasn't angry. In fact, he seemed pleased. "We'll go see them next weekend," he added. "Just don't talk too much about your past, all right? We'll keep it classy. No need to mention your hometown." He made it sound like he was protecting me. And just like that, he folded my life into his. I didn't know it then, but the ring he put on my finger weeks later wasn't a promise. It was a warning I didn't hear. It happened just a week before the wedding. One moment, I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, toasting a bagel and humming to some Nora Jones on the radio. The next, Victor was bursting through the front door, slamming it behind him like a hurricane in a three-piece suit. He didn't say hello, didn't look at me, just marched across the apartment with clenched fists and rage radiating off him like heat. I stood frozen by the counter. "Victor? What's wrong?" He turned slowly. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now ice. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't pretend you don't know." I blinked. "Know what?" His face twisted into something unfamiliar, something cruel. You think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't find out? Jesus, Olivia, you're carrying someone else's kid and you still expect me to marry you. The world spun. I don't understand. My voice barely made it out. What are you talking about? This is your child. You know that. He laughed. Not a real laugh, but the bitter kind that comes out of someone who's already made up their mind. You think just because you played the shy little girl card, I wouldn't notice you sneaking around. I haven't, I whispered, stunned. I haven't done anything. But he wasn't listening, or maybe he never had. Victor stormed into the bedroom, yanked open the closet, and started ripping clothes off the hangers. What are you doing? I cried. He tossed a suitcase onto the bed and barked. Pack your things. You've got 30 minutes. Victor, please, this is a mistake. You're angry, I get it, but let's talk. There's nothing to talk about, he growled. You played me. Used me. Well, it ends now. I stood there, helpless, as he rifled through my drawers, throwing bras, sweaters, and memories onto the floor. His movements were sharp, surgical, as if he'd rehearsed this. I tried to grab my laptop, anything that was mine, but he snatched it from my hands. That's company property. No, it's not, I snapped, louder than I'd ever spoken to him. I bought it with my own money, before we even— You want to argue over a laptop now, he sneered. Fine, keep it, but the rest. He gestured to the jewelry, the designer coats, the handbags. Those were gifts, and gifts can be taken back. I could barely breathe. My chest was tight, my hands shaking. I thought of the baby growing inside me and felt like collapsing. Victor, please, I begged. You don't have to do this. At least, let's go to the doctor. We can confirm. He stepped forward and hissed. I don't care. I don't care who the father is. It's not my problem anymore. You can go trap someone else. Tears burned in my eyes. How can you say that? You said we were family. He snorted. That was before I realized you're just another gold digger with a sob story. I backed away as if slapped. He walked to the door and opened it wide. You can take the clothes you're wearing and whatever fits in that bag. The rest stays. I was silent, numb. I packed jeans, a hoodie, some underwear, my prenatal vitamins. I left behind the dress I picked out for our engagement photos. The heels, he said, made me look powerful. The silk nightgown he bought on our trip to Santa Barbara. Everything that had made me feel like I belonged in his world. As I zipped my duffel bag, he tossed my employee badge onto the table. You're terminated, effective today. I'd advise against filing a complaint. You're firing me too? In this company, he said coolly, I can do whatever I want. And if you raise a fuss, I'll make sure every recruiter in the state knows what you really are. When I didn't move fast enough, he made a call. 2 men showed up minutes later, broad-shouldered, expressionless, and clearly hired for intimidation. You'll escort her out, Victor instructed, barely looking at me. She's no longer welcome on this property. The guard stood there waiting. I held onto my bag like it was my last piece of dignity. As I stepped toward the door, Victor held out his hand. Ring. I stared at him. He wiggled his fingers. Now. I slid the engagement ring off my swollen finger. It caught for a moment, as if reluctant to leave. I dropped it in his palm without a word. He didn't even look at it. The guards led me out. Down the hallway, past the marble foyer I once thought was mine too. One opened the door of a black SUV, waiting outside. He said to drop you off wherever you want. I didn't say a word. I didn't have the strength. The car pulled away. The city passed me by in a blur. And for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go. I didn't cry in the car. Not once. Not when they dropped me 2 blocks from Katie's apartment in the freezing wind. Not when I dragged my duffel bag up 3 flights of stairs with numb fingers and a burning throat. I held it together like someone watching her own life through a glass window. Disconnected, already halfway gone. Katie was the only person I could think of. We hadn't talked in months, maybe longer, but she was still saved in my phone under Ride or Die. She opened the door in flannel pajamas, holding a mug of wine and blinking like she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. "Olivia," she said, confused. Then she saw the bag, my face, the look in my eyes. "Oh God," she whispered. "What happened?" I didn't answer. I just stood there. A silence so raw hung between us. It said everything. She let me in. Her apartment was small, cluttered, warm. We sat at her kitchen table under dim lighting. She poured me tea while I stared at my reflection in the window, shocked at how hollow I looked. "You can stay here," she said, slowly, carefully. "Just for a bit. I mean, I'm about to sublet this place. I'm moving back in with my parents for a while. Work's a mess. But a few nights, yeah, of course." I nodded, even though I didn't know what that meant. A few nights. That was all I had. The first evening, she was kind. Made me pasta. Let me borrow her robe. She even cracked a joke about Victor being a walking red flag wrapped in Armani. I forced a laugh. It felt fake. The next morning, she saw the prenatal vitamins on the counter. "You're pregnant." I nodded. She stared for a moment, then sighed. "That bastard." After that, things shifted. She started coming home late, leaving fewer blankets on the couch. She'd make offhand comments like, "Wish I had someone to pay my rent," or "Guess I should have dated a CEO instead of writing ad copy." I didn't blame her. I was an intrusion. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I tried applying for jobs, but the moment I listed my most recent experience at Langston Group, everything stopped cold. "We'll let you know. We'll be in touch." But they never were. One hiring manager was blunt. "Your name came up. Sorry, but the reputation, it's not great. Word is you lied about your qualifications. Slept your way into the job. Bit of a liability." I wanted to scream. That wasn't me. That wasn't the truth. But in the eyes of this world, Victor Langston spoke gospel, and I was just a footnote he erased. After 3 rejections in 1 week, I stopped putting on makeup. My inbox was filled with unread job alerts. I knew none of them would matter. Then came the day I broke. It started like any other gray, meaningless Tuesday. I took a city bus across town, trying to conserve what little I had left on my prepaid phone. I'd heard they still had some of my belongings at the office. Things from my desk, notebooks, a pair of flats, my grandmother's mug. I didn't want anything from that place, but I needed to take back the pieces of myself they hadn't thrown out yet. The building was sleek as ever. Marble floors, glass doors, that quiet hum of power. I nearly turned around, but something inside me, something angry, kept going. At reception, there was a new assistant. Blonde, manicured, younger. "Hi, I'm looking for... You're Olivia, right?" she interrupted. "Mr. Langston isn't in." "I'm not here for him," I said, my voice low. "I used to work here. I just came to pick up a few personal things." She looked at me like I was a cautionary tale, the girl they all whispered about in the break room. "I don't know anything about that," she said. "Let me ask someone." A minute later, Tamara from accounting appeared. She used to laugh at my jokes over stale coffee and dry donuts. Now she barely met my eyes. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile. I saved your stuff. Here." She handed me a small box, the kind they use for printer paper. It was light, pathetic. "Thanks," I whispered. That should have been it. I should have left. But just then, Victor walked in. He froze when he saw me. I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt. Not even surprise. Just irritation. He turned and walked straight into his office, shutting the door behind him. I stood there for a beat. Then another. Then I walked after him. "Victor," I said, knocking once. "Open the door." Silence. "Victor." I yelled. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to destroy my life and hide behind your door." The new assistant gasped. Tamara backed away. I started banging. "You coward. Open it. Say it to my face." Still nothing. Security was called. Or maybe they weren't. I honestly don't know. I kept shouting, crying, screaming things I wouldn't remember later. Eventually, someone grabbed my arm. Then another. "You need to leave, miss," someone said. But I didn't stop until they dragged me out, kicking, sobbing, clutching that stupid cardboard box like it held the last of my dignity. Outside, the wind hit hard. My hair stuck to my cheeks. My knees scraped the sidewalk when I stumbled. I sat there for a minute, shaking. And then I stood up. Because what else was I supposed to do? When Katie finally asked me to leave, she didn't say it with cruelty, just quiet exhaustion. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed, eyes somewhere over my shoulder. "Liv, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." That was all. No explanations. No fight. I just nodded and zipped up my bag. I didn't ask where she wanted me to go. She didn't offer any ideas. The door clicked behind me like a sentence being finished. I spent one night at a 24-hour diner, nursing black coffee and pretending to scroll through my phone so the waitress wouldn't ask questions. Another night curled in the back of a bus terminal, my coat wrapped around my belly, praying the security guard wouldn't notice I hadn't bought a ticket. That morning, I opened the weather app and saw the forecast. Snow, heavy wind, power outages possible. And that's when something cracked. I remembered the little house my grandfather used to take me to when I was a girl, before the cancer, before the silence that swallowed our family whole. A one-story cottage, just off a gravel road in the Flint Hills. No Wi-Fi, no working plumbing, probably, but it had 4 walls, and no one to kick me out. I took a long bus west. My entire world was stuffed into 2 trash bags and a duffel, balanced between my legs like a dam about to break. The driver didn't ask questions. Neither did the other passengers. Everyone looked away. It's funny how invisible a pregnant woman becomes when she has no ring and no return address. The last stop was a gas station. No taxis, no signal. I walked the rest of the way in boots with splitting soles and socks that felt like paper. By the time I reached the house, the sun was setting behind clouds the color of wet cement. It looked worse than I remembered. The paint peeled off like skin. Shutters hung crooked. The roof had collapsed on one corner. I stood in front of it and almost laughed. This was it, my sanctuary. The key was still in the old flower pot by the porch. I stepped inside and nearly gagged. Mold, dust, cold. But beneath all that, it smelled like memory, like linoleum floors and burnt soup, like the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged. I spent the first 2 hours cleaning with paper towels and desperation. I lit 3 candles. 2 blew out. The third flickered like it was considering giving up too. There was no mattress, only an old cot folded in the corner. I laid my coat on top of it and curled sideways, hands on my stomach. "I don't have anything to give you yet," I whispered to the life inside me. "But I swear I'll figure it out." That night, the wind howled through cracks in the wood. I heard mice in the walls, rain tapping like fingers on the roof, and I slept harder than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made a plan. I scavenged what was still usable, an old kettle, a rusted camping stove, some canned food that hadn't expired. I boiled water over a fire pit in the backyard. I washed my face in the freezing runoff from the hill. I made lists in a half-burned notebook I found in the kitchen drawer. Fix the roof, patch the windows, find a doctor, figure out money. There was no reception, no internet, no noise, just me, the trees, and the sound of birds that didn't care I'd lost everything. I found the old mailbox, rusted shut. Inside, it was a single yellow envelope dated 5 years ago. My name on the front. It was from my grandfather, a letter I'd never received. His handwriting looked older, shakier than I remembered. "Livy, if you're reading this, it means you finally came back. I always hoped you would. This house, it's not much, but it's yours. Do what you want with it. Tear it down, rebuild it, live in it. Just know you're never as alone as you think you are. Love you forever, Grandpa." I held the letter to my chest and sobbed until the sun broke through the clouds and spilled light across the chipped floorboards. That week, I found an old broom. I cleared out broken glass and dragged the torn curtains down. I opened every window and let the cold air scrub the bitterness from the walls. Each chore was like peeling away a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. By Friday, I started hearing my own voice again. Not the voice Victor had tried to erase. Not the one-job interviews ignored. My voice. Clear. Determined. Quietly furious. I hadn't vanished. I'd just been buried. And now, I was digging myself out. The snow came hard that night. Thick, fast, wind-blown sheets that buried the front steps by morning. I woke up to a world silenced in white. Even the trees looked stunned. Branches weighed down like bowed heads. I boiled water on the rusted stove for oatmeal, then bundled myself in every piece of fabric I could find. My coat, a flannel shirt I'd used as a curtain, even a towel draped like a scarf. The cold had teeth now, real ones. It bit at my knuckles and crept down my spine like an echo of something ancient. I was just about to seal the front door with duct tape, my latest attempt at insulation, when I heard it. Footsteps. Crisp. Measured. Coming up the gravel road that no one used anymore. I froze. No one knew I was here. Not Katie. Not Victor. Not even the landlord I never called back. For a second, my mind scrambled toward the worst possibilities. A debt collector. Someone from Victor's circle. A stranger with bad intentions. But then I saw him. A man, maybe mid-30s, wrapped in a thick Carhartt jacket and snow boots, face half covered with a scarf. He was carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a shovel in the other. He stopped at the edge of the porch, clearly surprised to see the front door cracked open and someone inside. "You must be Olivia," he said, voice calm, respectful. "I'm sorry if this is out of line. I live about a quarter mile that way." He gestured vaguely toward the hills behind him. "Name's Daniel Walker. My dad used to keep an eye on this place before he passed. When I saw smoke from the chimney this week, well, figured someone was home again." I didn't speak. My grip on the doorknob tightened. He must have sensed it because he raised both hands slightly, still holding the bag and the shovel. "I'm not here to bother you. Just wanted to drop this off. Some food, bottled water, a few essentials. Storm's getting worse, and the power lines are already acting up. I figured. Better safe than sorry." He placed the bag gently on the porch, backed up 2 steps. "I'll be on my way," he added. "No pressure. Just welcome back, I guess." And then he turned. That was it. No lingering. No questions. No awkward small talk. Just a neighbor showing up with food and walking away into the snow. I didn't move for a long time. I stared at the brown paper bag like it might vanish if I blinked. Eventually, I stepped out, grabbed it, and brought it inside. Inside were things that felt almost like a gift from the universe. A small carton of milk, instant coffee, batteries, 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, and prenatal vitamins. That last item made my knees buckle. I sank to the floor, the bag between my legs, hands shaking. I hadn't told a soul out here I was pregnant, but somehow someone had seen it. A complete stranger. And instead of pity or judgment, he offered kindness. I wasn't used to kindness anymore. I sipped the warm soup that night with both hands, wrapped around the mug, like it was holy. I watched the snow pile higher against the windows and imagined this Daniel Walker out there somewhere. Maybe chopping firewood, maybe listening to the same wind tear at his windows. He hadn't asked me anything, and that was the most comforting part. 3 days later, he came back, this time with a toolbox and a bucket of nails. "Roof needs patching," he said simply, standing at the edge of the porch again, as if waiting for me to tell him to go. I didn't. I just nodded. "I can help." We worked mostly in silence. I handed him tools, held boards in place while he hammered, swept away the mess while he reinforced the loose shingles. He never pried. Not once did he ask why I was here or who I was running from, or what kind of woman ends up pregnant and alone in a half-collapsed house during a Kansas winter. Instead, he just showed up. That became our rhythm. Every few days, a knock on the door, a short conversation, a small gesture, firewood, plumbing advice, once even a coat in my size. And slowly, something inside me thawed. Not trust, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Hope, maybe. Not that everything would magically fix itself, but that not everything had to stay broken. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking beyond survival. I started imagining a life where I could make this house whole again, where I could raise my baby surrounded by trees and sky and quiet, where kindness wasn't a currency, just something people did. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do this alone. When the letter from my attorney arrived, I sat with it in my lap for a long time before opening it. My name, clean and printed in bold, looked foreign against the cream envelope, like it belonged to someone more put together, someone who still ironed her clothes and wore lipstick to brunch. But it was mine, and it meant the court date was set. I was going back to Topeka, back to Victor, back to everything I had worked so hard to survive. Daniel offered to drive me, but I said no. I needed to walk into that building by myself. I needed to feel every step, every tile beneath my boots, every second of that cold morning air slicing through my coat. I didn't want anyone else's strength. I wanted my own. The courtroom was as I remembered it, gray, impersonal, sterile. Victor's lawyer stood polished and smug. Flipping through papers like this was just another easy win. And Victor, he didn't even look surprised to see me, just mildly inconvenienced, like someone who'd been asked to return a package that was already out of sight and out of mind. But I looked different. I wasn't the woman he'd discarded 6 months ago, dazed and bleeding in a marble kitchen. I wasn't the girl who sobbed into her engagement dress after reading a cold, legal termination of a relationship he'd reduced to asset transfers and NDAs. I was Olivia Reed, and I had receipts, literal ones, because for the past 4 months, I hadn't just been hiding in a crumbling house in Flint Hills. I had been documenting every false claim in his financial disclosures, every forged signature in the prenup amendment he'd filed while I was in the hospital, every company expense misclassified to keep assets out of the divorce, and the big one, a transfer of $150,000 to an offshore account created 3 days before he served me with papers, in someone else's name, a name I recognized, his new girlfriend. When I handed those documents to my attorney, I saw Victor flinch for the first time. It was subtle, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But I saw it. His lawyer scrambled, asked for a recess. Denied. I sat with my back straight and my hands folded. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because this was the moment I had rebuilt myself for. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for theatrics, took one look at the timeline and said the words I'd been waiting to hear. These discrepancies indicate an attempt to conceal marital assets. The court finds sufficient cause to freeze the defendant's accounts pending further investigation. Victor's jaw tightened. His eyes, always so confident, flicked to mine for just a second. I held his gaze, not with hatred, with finality. We didn't speak after the hearing. He stormed past me in the hallway, phone already to his ear, barking orders I no longer cared to decode. But I didn't move. I stood there in the cold marble corridor, breathing steady, my palms open, my chest light. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about making sure that child growing inside me never had to wonder if her mother had fought for her. And I had, with everything I had left. Later that week, the bank confirmed the account freeze. My portion of the marital estate, what Victor had tried to cheat me out of, would be returned. Not all at once, not easily, but it was coming, and with it came something more valuable. Closure. I didn't want his money. I wanted the truth to be seen, and for once it had been. I returned to Flint Hills under a gray sky and light snow. Daniel met me halfway down the drive, shovel in hand. eyes searching mine without asking a thing. "I take it you won," he said, smiling just enough to crinkle the edges of his eyes. "I did," I said softly, "but it doesn't feel like a win." He nodded, then gestured toward the porch. "That's okay. Sometimes it just needs to feel like a clean slate." I looked at the house behind him. It still needed work. New windows, a better roof, fresh paint. But for the first time since I arrived, it felt like mine, like something I could build on, not just hide in. And I realized then, winning doesn't always look like standing over someone who wronged you. Sometimes it looks like walking away, without needing to look back. The baby came on a Sunday morning, just as the frost began to settle across the fields like powdered sugar. I had spent the night tossing and turning, not out of pain, but anticipation, the quiet kind that settles into your bones when something is about to change forever. Her cry was sharp, immediate, demanding. She entered the world not with a whimper, but a roar, just like her mother had in a different way. I held her against my chest, skin to skin, and I whispered her name into the soft curls at the crown of her head. I had chosen it months ago, in the silence of a crumbling farmhouse, with only the crackle of the stove for company. Her name was Hope, not because I needed to be poetic, but because that's what she was even before she existed. Dr. Hayes smiled gently as he handed me the paperwork. "She's healthy. You're both going to be just fine, Olivia." Those words, "you're going to be fine," landed differently now. They weren't empty encouragements. They were the truth. I had proof in my arms, all 5 pounds of it, eyes like mine, a tiny frown that reminded me of Grandpa Reed. Cassidy brought flowers. Daniel brought fresh-baked cinnamon rolls and pretended he didn't notice the tears I tried to hide when he asked if I'd picked out a middle name yet. "I was thinking," I said slowly, "maybe her middle name should be Eleanor." He blinked, surprised. "Your mother-in-law?" "No," I said softly, then looked out the window, where the snow had begun to fall in slow, peaceful flakes. The woman who raised my child's father might have failed me, but she did one thing right. She taught me exactly who not to become. Daniel didn't press further. He simply sat beside me, our shoulders touching, as we watched the snow coat the world outside in white. I didn't return to Topeka. I had no reason to. Victor, and I never spoke again. His assets were divided, his reputation damaged just enough to slow him down, but not destroy him. I didn't need him destroyed. I just needed him irrelevant. And he was. Instead, I stayed in Flint Hills. I planted a garden. I sanded down the porch swing. I painted the nursery in warm tones and strung up little white stars across the ceiling. Every nail I hammered, every book I stacked on the shelf, every lullaby I hummed to myself while folding tiny onesies, it all stitched me back together in ways I didn't think were possible. A few weeks after Hope was born, I woke up before sunrise and walked outside in my slippers, baby monitor in hand. The air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I stood at the edge of the porch, breath rising in clouds, and looked across the hills. Everything was still, quiet, sacred. That's when I noticed it. On the railing of the porch, written in delicate frost, was her name. Hope. I hadn't done it. Neither had Daniel or Cassidy or anyone I knew. It was just there, like the universe was saying, "Yes, this is right. This is yours." I'm not saying life became perfect. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days the roof still leaked, weeks I questioned if I was strong enough to raise a child alone. But I was never truly alone again. Hope's tiny fingers wrapped around mine every morning. Her laughter filled the cracks in my spirit. Her presence made my pain feel like a distant echo. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being broken. But it turns out the worst thing is believing you'll never be whole again. Because you will. Maybe not in the way you expected. Maybe not with the people you started with. But in time. And in truth, you'll rebuild. I did. And every time I look at her, at Hope, I'm reminded, some stories don't end with revenge. They begin with it, and then they become something softer, something braver, something like love,